Welcome to our Brand Q webinar. We do these about every month, month and a half, and try to hit topics that matter to brands as well as to the suppliers that service the brands. And today we're going to talk about print quality programs for brands. And the reason for this actually is Brian Keith, who I'll introduce in just a minute. But a few months ago we were talking about this one day, and he said maybe brands don't understand why this even matters. So that's a big part of the reason that we're doing this topic today. My name is Ron Ellis. I'm a consultant. I work in Northeast. I live in New Hampshire, and I do quite a bit with Idealliance as well. So I am a G7 trainer, and Idealliance has G7 online trainings coming up, which if you're interested, you can go to their website and see those there. And also do a lot with the Brand Q program, which is focused for brands. So I spend about a third of my time dealing with suppliers, like printers. I spend about a third of my time dealing with brands, and the other third of my time doing, miscellaneous G7 type stuff. So I have quite a bit of experience on both sides, and I'll share a little bit of that with you guys today. Our panelists that we have are great because, I get to be here and talk a lot, but it's really important to actually hear from the real brands themselves. So I think, what brings people to these webinars usually are the panelists, and in this case we have panelists who aren't the usual brands. I mean, not the usual suppliers and things. They're not selling anything. They don't make any software. They're the brand. They're the ones who actually deal with these issues. First panelist today is Brian Keith. He's a Senior PM Print and Color Management Project Manager for the Packaging and Content Division. So he works with the Surface. He works with the game consoles. So he's the Xbox. So he's super experienced, and he's great because, as you'll see, he's super analytical. He looks at things from a really high level and really gets into the details and super thorough at this. So he does a great job. Our second panelist is Sonia Dearden. She's the print production manager at Lindt, and she began this journey like about 4.5 or so years ago, and went just from being creative to right now she understands everything we're talking about and the metrics, and runs this program and works with lots of suppliers. Super challenging, critical colors, and really hard stuff that she works on, and great experience. She's been through it. She deals with the hard topics. Some products are easy to color, QC, and manage, and her products are really difficult. So what we're going to talk about today is we're going to talk about the Brand Q things. I'll talk about just a quick overview of quality programs and why they matter to brands. Brian will talk about high level why this matters, what's important, and then Sonia's going to talk about the brand and how her program works a little bit and go through that. So we're going to hit that. And typically we'll each talk for about 10 or 15 minutes, and then at the end we'll have about 15 or 20 minutes where we can do Q&A. So we'll get right into it and get going. And the Q&A, you can use the chat box. So if you use your chat, you can send that questions, or the Q&A box, and send those in, and Amy will catch those and get those all ready for us to work with. I'll talk just for a minute about Brand Q because these webinars are sponsored by Brand Q, which is Idealliance's brand color program. And the big ideas here are communication, education, and validation. So the idea of being able to tell your supply chain what you want, as well as other people you work with in your own company, giving everyone the education so they can speak that language, and then being able to check and make sure the print actually is the right quality and that you've achieved what you needed. These are some pictures. This is a live G7 or live Brand Q class. You can see over there on the left, there's pictures of print buyers. So those are all people who are from the brand side buying print. They're going through and they're measuring samples that we have and learning about the language of color and how we actually communicate it. Communication, this is people looking at samples, and actually, Sonia, that's one of your Lindt samples right there. But looking at samples, proof to press, and kind of discussing the differences and how do you articulate that back and forth. And then validate, and that's measuring, and these are just pictures of some of the sample kit, but that's measuring and learning how to measure and check and see color. So Brand Q is communication, education, validation. If you're interested, you can go to idealliance.org and you can look that up, and there's a 9-hour online training program. And then occasionally it's offered live as well in different spots. But of course, there's not too much live training going on right now. So we'll start off, and I'll start my little part. And I'm not going to talk very long because I want to introduce you to these guys. And they're the brands. They're the ones who are actually dealing with this. They have the knowledge that you need. But I'm going to talk for just a minute about why it matters. Why does print quality matter? I'll show, I'll kind of sketch out an example of the impact this can have on your workflow if you're a brand. And then I'll talk a little bit about how to get started. So I'll be pretty brief, but I'm just going to hit these key ideas. And kind of the big idea with print quality is you can either control your print or your print can control you. So if you're somebody who buys print and works with print quality and buys packaging and things like that, you know that if you have it under control, things go pretty smoothly. But when things are out of control, then people get in trouble. Products get reprinted. It puts a lot of stress both on the brand and the supplier to get things right. And most brands have to get something in a store or shipped out, or they get penalized or lose money. So print quality is really important. And I don't think people always think about it, but a really good time to think about it is right now with the virus and COVID-19. And that's because we can't actually physically go on press checks. So for those people who are used to just going on the press check and doing it, you're suddenly having to put a lot of trust into the suppliers. And one of the things about a print quality program is that if you can tell them what you want and they have a way to measure it, then it helps you trust them a lot more because they can actually report and you can be assured that they're actually printing what you want. So print quality really does matter. And it's that feeling of having things under control. It's never going to be perfect, but having things reasonably under control or just feeling like things are spinning out of control. If you look at examples of print quality, these are just things that I grabbed and took pictures of. You can see there's a box of graham crackers, and even, that's what you would probably call low-end packaging. It has to look pretty and everything, but it's not like cosmetics or something. But you can see even in that world, they have control strips on it. They're looking at it. They're checking the quality of it. If you look to the right, you can see the toothpaste tube, even printing on plastic, has QC on it to make sure the brand colors are correct. And then down below that is a beverage, and you can see they've got their control strips on there, making sure everything is right there. And look at the last two colors, because I think those are Pepsi, but I'm not sure. And then on the lower left, that's a Lindt chocolate bar, one of Sonia's products that I had. And if you took, I just peeled the flap back, and you can see there's a little picture of that there. So you can see that, lots of brands do this already. If you haven't done it already, I'll talk about how you get into it. But lots of brands do it already. The bigger the brand is, probably the more likely they've done it because there's a lot at stake there. If we take a second, I'm going to sketch out a quick little a quick little workflow and show you guys kind of what's at stake. I'll just take a second. So I'm going to pop over here, and I'm going to flip over to a different presentation. So on the screen here, you can see I've got just kind of something blank, and I'm going to sketch out a couple different things, scenarios. And one would be, what if I had, 10 printers that I'm working with? So I'm going to sketch out like 10 little printing plants. Each one of these squares could mean a printing plant. And if I have my my little product that I'm working with, so I have maybe my packaging or something, and I have my artwork and everything. So the old-fashioned way of doing it, and maybe I've got over here some other stuff like gravure. So maybe this is litho. Maybe this is gravure. And maybe I've got a few flexo printers doing labels for me. So a couple things that would happen would be right now, if I was doing normal printing the old-fashioned way, every single one of these would have maybe a different color approval, a different check, a different standard. Somebody would have to go there at least once and sign off on it. A lot of FedExing back and forth. And, so each of these printers has their own little standard. And a lot of travel, probably getting there, and a lot of FedExing. And each of these would be a different piece of artwork modified to work correctly. So, at that point, if we look at this, I've probably got 15 different iterations of the artwork, which are set up. And if I have to switch one of these pieces of artwork to another printer, like say this guy goes out, and I got to move the work over there, then it's got to be re-separated, or if they send the wrong artwork, I get the wrong result. So that would be kind of the old, method of doing it. And there's a lot of chaos in there because that's a lot of flights, that's a lot of, back and forth and things like that, and taking the airplane and flying around and everything. If I look at another way of doing it, so if I looked at the way that we're talking about, I would have my same piece of artwork, but that would be designed to a standard. And, in the world of G7, usually that way, but spot colors, we'd spec them. Then I'm going to communicate that standard to all of these printers. So all of these printers here are going to get that standard communicated to them. And same with the gravure ones, and same with the flexo. So I'm going to do that so everybody has the spec. So we're going to give everyone the same spec. They've got to hit the same color. Everybody's using the same proof. And then basically, by the numbers, I want them to hit that. So they're going to use one piece of artwork. Everyone's going to print to that same, using that same standard and piece of artwork. And then if I have to move a job from one printer to another, I can easily move it. And if they're printing to the numbers and they're checking it before they send it to me, then I no longer have all this chaos of having to go on all these different press checks like over here. So this is the idea of having one spec that we communicate to everybody, then having a way to measure it and check it. So the printer can check it and we can spot check it too. So this is kind of the big idea that I'll talk about. And that workflow on the left involves lots of flying and airplanes, and it's super expensive and inefficient. And the one on the right is not perfect for sure. But what it does do is it gives you common standards, common way to communicate, and common expectations across that entire supply chain. So that's what we're really talking about here. So let me just flip back and just a few more things, and then I'll pass it on to the other guys. And whoops, that's another. So the whole idea there of what I was showing was just, just about, are we controlling it or is it controlling us? Some of the big ideas, and this is what we talk about in the Brand Q program, and these guys might talk a little bit about it, but the first big idea is figuring out what are you printing to, what is your standard? And for a lot of creatives and marketing departments, they maybe never have done that before, but that's idea is where we're going to pick a spec, and once we pick that spec, we can design to it. So typically when I do this and work with a brand, we're going to pick that specification for printing and for the substrates we're on. And then we're going to basically give that to our art department, our creative departments, and our agencies. So once we've done that, our internal designers can begin to design to it, the external people as well. So people can actually see what it will look like. So typically in a medium-sized brand, we might actually put a proofer in. And that marketing department will start to get, immediate pictures of what they're designing, not waiting for things to go out and get printed or get proofs. Once we've done that, we built that internal standard and we have a way to visualize it within the brand. Then we're going to go out and talk to the supply chain and communicate and tell them what you want. So the idea is you're telling them what you want, not vague, not too cool, not too warm, but you're telling them here's exactly what we're looking for. Here's the numbers and here's how we're going to check it. At that point, they should be measuring and checking so they don't ship you anything bad or call you before they do if there's some technical issue. But then you'll spot check, maybe your QA department will check or you'll check as well. The idea is get the supplier to do most of the checking and they shouldn't really ship you things that don't match, but you want to be able to check stuff too. And then you can share the results of that with your marketing department and your purchasing department, and they can make decisions on, who do we work with, who do we print with, as well as what colors should we use and what are we having luck with and what things don't work too well. So pretty good feedback. A lot of this is about getting the right result, but if you do it correctly, you can visualize before you print, and you can also get pretty good feedback on it as well. When you want to get started with it, these are these 3 key points of Brand Q. If you've never done anything, you could go on the Brand Q online learning, and you could actually run through that course and get some basics. But the idea, first you want to learn how to talk about it and the knowledge you need to actually do this, which isn't terribly hard. but there's some, some new things for a lot of people. And sometimes even the supplier needs to learn it. So I found that probably 60% of the suppliers are up to speed, and you give this to them and they know what to do, but some of them will need a little bit of education on their side. You have to have a good way to communicate it, and then a good way to measure and check the results. So that would typically be in QC software, where we're measuring and checking and sharing all the results. A lot of the presses right now, so the press manufacturers are pretty good. The presses on the litho side are probably as good as they've ever been. So companies like KBA and Heidelberg and Komori and Manroland, and those guys, they can actually take those measurements and shoot those right out. So in some of the cases here with the Panelists, they're getting live measurements from presses. And so they don't have to do the measuring, and they can see what's going on with it. It's pretty neat. Some of the hints for starting would be start really small. So you don't try to do your entire, supply chain. Don't try to do your entire product line when you begin. Start off with like one product or maybe one product line or color family. And you want to get, both you and the suppliers kind of go through it and get the basics done first. At the same time that you're working with your suppliers, you want to get your design team and your marketing department and purchasing department tied into this, because there's a lot of benefits for both of those. And then if you need help, you can use a brand Q expert. So there's people like myself, I'm a brand Q expert, and there's quite a few others who've gone through this, and they're listed on the Idealliance website. You can get help, and they can, remotely or in person come and kind of help you build these documents and give you some of the missing, special case education that you might need. So that's kind of the intro to print quality. It's a pretty quick pass through, but know that there's a lot of these webinars already recorded, and Idealliance has Brand Q as well as a great program to learn about this. So now we're going to go to our brands, and first we're going to start off with Brian Keith, and then Sonia will present after him, and then we'll get into Q&A. So Brian, take it away, and Amy, you can pass it over to him.
Yes, Brian, I'm passing it over to you. And just a reminder to folks who might have joined a little late, you can send a question through the chat box to me, Amy, the host, at any time, and I will read those questions aloud at the end of the session.
Okay, thanks everyone. Can you hear me?
Yeah, you sound good.
Excellent. Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. For those of you on the West Coast, good morning. Glad to be here. As Ron mentioned, I had a conversation with him a while back, really around experiences that I've had, not only as a brand, not only previously experience working at brand agencies, but also just working with printers and really trying to bring some clarity, not only to printers about how brands think about things, but really today, in many ways, speaking directly to the other brands on the phone. Trying to help them think about how they need to reorganize the way that they do their supply chain. Point out some challenges that I think we will all relate to, whether we're a printer or whether we're a brand, and hopefully it starts to plant the seed into how you guys can start thinking about things differently. So I will keep it pretty high level today. I'm not going to get really down into the weeds. So just think of this as a glimpse, and hopefully this is a good starting point for everyone. So how do brands think about color quality? I think consistency for brands, especially a brand like Microsoft, it's quite big. Maybe for many people, you guys don't think of Microsoft as a packaging company. We've actually been doing packaging hardware. I think mice, I believe our first one launched was 1985. And we've been doing hardware since then. Obviously, we've done software. We now do Surface, Xbox, HoloLens, still do PC hardware, mice, keyboards, headsets, HoloLens, all of those things. And really, how can we manage that, especially when there's only two of us in the company looking at color for our entire portfolio? We literally have thousands of parts, tens of thousands of parts that release every year, thousands of SKUs that really support a global, are manufactured with a global supply chain. Many times that's a simultaneous manufacturing of the supply chain. So that means, as Ron indicated earlier, we will release only one file. That one file may be manufactured exact same day, simultaneously at multiple sites, multiple continents. How do we make sure that those things are consistent? As I called out, consistency is key, right? The other thing from a brand perspective or a global brand perspective like ourselves, I think back early in my career, I would hear a lot of printers talking about, oh, we have this new special capability. We have a waterless press, or we can do, all these special things. And for a global brand, really, the most important thing is consistency. Great that printer can do those things. And if I had a single run or a very limited run that's dedicated to that printer, I very well may take advantage of that. But if we're looking at a world in which we're printing traditional litho, gravure, flexo, digital print, that consistency just becomes king. So brands are evolving. I think we've all seen this before. Cost, time, and quality. Choose two. I think we've always heard that. I know I came up hearing that. Well, the reality is that's not good enough anymore. It used to be the case of, yeah, you can choose two, but you can't have all three. Some of the new technologies that are coming in, some of the new methodologies like G7, the way that we think about communicating what is in fact acceptable versus not acceptable, those actually all play directly into all three of these. I'll go over that a little bit later, but really I think the takeaway for printers, especially from this slide, is that old trope, choose two, is just not gonna work anymore. Brands are demanding more of that, and as brands, you guys should understand that there are technologies and ways out there that you can now actually get all of those. So how do brands actually think about color? This is as marketing speak as I'll get today, but color says a lot about a brand. It's among the most important and recognizable brand elements. Color subtly communicates who a brand is and what their values are. Color also says a lot about how a brand operates. Their attention to detail, focus on quality, and commitment to consistency can all be conveyed subliminally through color. So if you think of a product lineup, things on the shelf, if a customer picks up a can of soup that's faded, what is the customer going to think about that? Are they going to think that it's old? Is it spoiled? Is it out of date? Many things come up with that. So again, really thinking and understanding a brand's idea about color isn't just about that one package, about that one component. A brand is really thinking about color as not only their entire product line, but also how that reflects back on them. Many times a physical package is the first interaction that a brand that a consumer may have with a brand. So how can you make that experience as interesting, as pleasing, as enjoyable as possible, right? I think we've all probably gone to a store, whether it's picking up potato chips and you're not wanting the one that's in the front of the row because somebody may have broken all the chips inside, or you're going and you're picking something else out and you want to pick one that's behind so that somebody else hasn't touched it, right? I think we all subtly do these little things in which we're looking for a very nice experience, and we don't want something that's less than perfect. So this question is really to the brands, but also as printers, I want you guys to think about if you guys have ever said this, or printers, if you've ever heard it. So this doesn't match what I signed off on. I think we've all, in our experience, probably said that at one point. I can't attend the press run of every language, every SKU, and every replenishment run. I know this one for me is a huge one. If I did that, I would never see my family. And if I if I did that. Also, I think quality wouldn't be there just because as a human, my eyes will see things differently. I'm not nearly as consistent as a piece of equipment. This is one of my favorites that I'm sure brands have experienced. My manager, design director, vice president doesn't like it, or he thinks it's too blank. It's too yellow, it's too faded, it's too saturated, whatever it is. Well, here's the problem. With that type of subjective input, how can the printers ever know what you're actually trying to manufacture? How do you know what you want? If it's based on opinion, you really can't set up a supply chain based on opinion. Opinion feeds into things, but then once you're beyond that, now you have to have something that's measurable. Ron spoke about this a moment ago. Next one, send me samples so I can review consistency and I'll let you know. I know that if I personally did this for every single thing that we launch, let alone every single replenishment run, for every language SKU, for every configuration of hardware, hard drive size, RAM, blah, 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 I would have to actually, my office would have to be a warehouse because there would be so many things coming in. So again, how do we get out of that old way of doing things? How do we get out of that hands-on and really look at it of saying, how can we be agile? Last, let's just adjust it on press. This is one of my favorites that comes from designers we work with. Let's just adjust it on press. You know, we'll get on press and we'll just move it around and then it'll be good where it's at. And then we'll send samples out to everyone. Well, first problem is you adjusted it on press on the first one. Well, now every time that printer needs to rerun it, they need to remember what changes you actually made on press. Secondarily, let's send it out to everyone. Well, now you get into error stacking, right? So the samples get sent out. Everyone tries to match that. It's not quite right. So we get into a problem there. Also to brands and to printers, this next one. So what happened to, I think we've all had this experience. Something has come in, something's gone wrong. Somebody's asked, what the heck happened? Inevitably, it's usually some VP or someone high up that has gone on vacation. They've purchased something, they went into a store, and lo and behold, they found something that's out of spec. It's strange. Something's going on. And you really have no way to know what is actually happening. And so then you get into the mad scramble of figuring out what was it, when did it print, where did it print, how long ago did it print? And then you start realizing, well, I have no idea how it was stored. What happened to it after it left the factory? I have no clue. One of my notorious ones was an Xbox console. A senior executive went somewhere in Australia, Outback or something, went into a store. There was an Xbox console that was pretty much bleached. Came back, said, what the heck happened? After about 3-4 weeks, we realized that that display unit had been sitting in the window in the dead of summer for 5 months, and it bleached. Well, some of that we can't control. It's, that's the retailer, but in reality, after it's manufactured, there's not much control. But what it really came back to is, well, was it in spec when it was actually manufactured? So again, what happened to question mark, right? I think we've all heard that. And then we probably heard some of these answers. Oh, Dave, or whoever the person's name is. Dave wasn't here when that job ran. I think we'd love that one because, Dave is their quality control manager at that supplier. For me personally, a person is not a quality control system. It's not a quality control management program. Dave is a person. Dave goes on vacation, right? My other personal favorite is the new guy on night shift. The new press operator on night shift didn't understand the expectations. I don't know what it is, but every printer I've ever worked at seems to hire the exact same night shift press operator because the same problems always come up, and it's always that guy. We matched our archived sample. Who knows how old the sample is? Who knows how it's been stored? Again, error stacking comes into play. The ink densities were right. So there must be something wrong with your artwork. I'm sure you, as brands, you've heard that one. And the other one is, we won't proceed without a physical signature. This last one to me is particularly challenging if you think of a global supply chain and you have thousands of parts coming in. What am I supposed to sign off on? If I get so many packages, I can't review them thoroughly enough and give a signature and get back to that individual to keep up with an agile supply chain. So how do we go about doing this, right? And I think hopefully what you're realizing as I'm talking here is these explanations aren't necessarily going to hold water anymore. We need a better way of doing it. We need to be able to get around those things. We need a better way of identifying when somebody says that they don't like something. Well, how can we actually put data towards that? How can we define and understand what is exactly wrong with the print? If a printer is shipping things that are outside of spec, well, don't give us excuses. Let's understand that it's outside of spec before it ever ships. And so I think the question here is, how can we as a brand put something in place to ensure quality, cost, and time to market are actually achieved? Relying on individual suppliers isn't going to solve that for us. Each of the suppliers has their own profit margin to think about. They're trying to hit their margins. They're trying to run their business for what makes sense to them. So as a brand, we really have to think. We have to clearly define what we want. We have to communicate what we want, and we have to be very clear of what the pass-fail criteria for that is. And when you do that, you could start putting some data, metrics, some analytics towards it to identify what opportunities are and how you can get in front of quality. Kind of all goes back to Pearson's Law. I know that G7 references this as well, slightly different wording, but it's so true. If you're not measuring something, how can you actually know that it's been improved? It's all anecdotal if it's not being measured. I think it's better. I haven't heard anybody say anything about it. And the next thing you know is that executive comes in and they put something down on your desk and say, what the heck happened? So basis for print quality program. Again, I'm going to keep it high level, but I think these are the three. I'm going to go over three core tenets of this. Consistency. As I said, from a brand perspective, consistency is key. How do we do that? Well, we have to define process control. How do we make sure that we are delivering the same thing consistently? We're delivering the right thing consistently. The suppliers have specific procedures for how they intake those, how they process those, how they proof those. And we have to make sure that they understand the specifications. What are the pass-fail criteria? What are if we have scorecarding, what does the scorecarding mean? Does that scorecarding even apply? Do we need to evolve the scorecarding as we begin to understand and get more data in? Accuracy. So now that we've defined a specification, so let's say we've defined a specific color or print aim, well, how do we make sure that the printers are actually understand print or understand quality management and those sorts of things? So you might need to have a color certification program to make sure that, yes, they understand it. They know how to calibrate their proofers. They know how to calibrate their presses to the print aims that you've identified. How do you certify that, in fact, they can do those things instead of the classic telling you what you want to hear? And lastly, accountability. So this comes down to proactive supplier performance quality management. So as I mentioned before, very quickly, how does the printer know whether something is within spec or not within spec? If they have to send it to you, and now you have to take it to a manager, and that manager, who may or may not be color savvy, is the one that approves or rejects something, that's a reactive program. So how can we upfront communicate what our requirements are, the tolerances, as I said, the scoring, so that we don't have to tell them something's passing or failing. They can tell themselves as the job is running, it's passing or it's failing. Oh, and the data is telling me that I need to make such and such move because the color is too red, it's too warm. We need to we need to cool it down based on the data. So print quality program advantages. I think it goes back to that first slide, time, cost, quality. These are some of the overall quality program advantages. Again, a little bit high level, but hopefully you guys can start to see this all is playing back into those three things. So as Ron said earlier, you incorporate print aims from the design initiation all the way through production. So you've got to know where you're going before you set out on the journey, right? Otherwise, you're going to get surprises down the line. You clearly communicate those tolerances, set up the scorecard methodologies up front. By clarifying those expectations, you help the suppliers accurately quote. You help your sourcing and purchasing managers and teams accurately compare competing bids. If you don't have that stuff defined, that printer is going to send you what they think you want. And if you are comparing bids across multiple vendors, that may not be the same thing. If you're a supplier, the advantage is you know that your bid, your quote, is on equal footing with everyone else. You're all bidding on the same thing. You're not having to make guesses and find out later, oh, I was way off the mark. By doing all those things, you actually end up improving quality and consistency without increasing costs, because you're not throwing surprises at the suppliers. You as a brand are not being surprised by something coming in that didn't meet your expectations, and now you have to incur scrap costs. It all comes back to that early communication. This other favorite of mine here, eliminating the subjectivity. This is a huge thing for me. At a company like Microsoft, we have a lot of executives. We have a lot of people that are very successful and thus feel that their input and opinion should be acted upon. Well, if we're running a business off of subjectivity, we're going to be all over the place. It's going to be week to week. It's going to be different month to month, year to year. It's going to be all over the place. And frankly, many times those managers, they want us to handle it. If we show the ability to go in and actually provide quality, then they don't feel the need to get in there and start sharing their opinion if we're consistently delivering results that meet their expectations. Drives accountability. So ensures every lot, order, job is in tolerance. So I don't know for you guys, but there have been times for me, I've gone in, I've signed off on press sheets, or when I worked at a printer, I would see people sign off on press sheets, and they walk out the door, and who knows what happens. What happens an hour later? What happens next week when they do a replan run? What happens when they put the related foreign language version on the press? Do the exact same settings still apply? Or it's sunny today, it's raining tomorrow. Here in Seattle, that's pretty common. So that can swing things. Another one is eliminating press checks. So like I said before, I really have no desire to get on a plane traveling all around the world in normal times, let alone these days. So really, programs like this allow you to manage quality without having to be heavy-handed with it. And also enables accurate and consistent accountability and simultaneous manufacturing. So if we are manufacturing something the exact same every day, it looks good. Or if there's a transformation that needs to happen to a SKU from one region to another, we know that print quality is going to be within tolerance. And lastly, so for some of the data nerds out there, provides actual actionable data. I think a lot of times companies get into collecting data for data's sake, and they look at all the stuff we did, and this is how many things we printed, and this is how many revisions we had. Well, that's all great, but let's do something actionable. If we can see that a supplier is having a problem, if we can see that a region's having a problem, we can identify are there tolerances that need to be changed, are there training needs or maintenance to a press. There are some of these systems I have no interest in this, but a supplier can go in and they can identify that new press operator on night shift needs more training. And that you can see specifically what's going on. You can see that individual's taking 3 hours for make ready, or you can see that they're consistently not doing something correctly. So this data is now not only helping us as brands, but it can also help suppliers actually identify opportunities internally. And then lastly is the powerful reporting capabilities. For a brand, for myself, I can look at a single job. So that program where I mentioned it faded, I can see what happened the day that it printed. I can also look at launch campaigns if I have multiple components. If I have an Xbox that's going to have accessories with it, I can look at that campaign and see is there anything going sideways? Is one product going sideways? Is one supplier going sideways? And then lastly, we can look at supplier performance. That can get into supplier performance reviews, so they know exactly they know the data I'm seeing. We can have a good substantive conversation around that. So going to come down off that slide and end right away, but hopefully this is helpful for you guys, and hopefully you guys have something to think about going forward.
Great, thanks, Brian. And Amy, can you pass that over to Sonia now?
Yes, Sonia, I'm going to go ahead and share your slides. So you just let me know if everything looks okay, and I'll navigate through them. Just let me know when to change. And then a reminder to folks, you can pop questions into the chat. We are running just a little bit behind, but we should have time for a few questions at the end.
And Ron, just checking, can you hear me okay?
Yep, you sound good.
Okay. All right, so I'll move quickly so we can make sure we get some questions in, because I think Brian and I think that's more important than anything, is for you guys to be able to shoot some questions at us. So with that, you can go ahead to that next slide, Amy, thank you. And then click one more time. So, I mean, basically what we're talking about here, and I will agree with absolutely every point that Brian made, because I have gone through every single one. 3 a.m. press checks, 10 pulls, the brand manager telling me, well, I don't really like what the proof looks like, but you can just fix that on press. Well, what does that mean if I can fix it on press? I'm not sure what they want. So, when you have a global brand, it's really important that the identity of the brand isn't left to various people and personal preferences. If expectations are clearly communicated at the beginning of the workflow, the better chance the identity of the brand can be maintained, regardless of who's designing it, who's prepping it, who's printing it, where you're printing it. So, if you move on to the next slide, Amy. So what we did is we have the old, and I crossed out process because it wasn't a process. It was exactly what we were saying. We had packaging samples coming from other countries. We were sending it to the vendor. It would get stuck in a drawer. It might be a year old. I had one vendor say to me, I was on press, and I said, that red doesn't look right. And they said, well, it's really hard with you guys because we have 6 reds for you on file. And I said, well, what do you mean? And they said, well, it depends who's here or which country is here, because we print for a couple different sister countries of yours. And I thought, oh boy, well, that's not good. So you can see this old way of doing things. Packaging samples sent all around the globe. No clear definition of the brand colors. We would get ink swatches and go, yep, nope, that looks great. And we'd go maybe 3 rounds of proofs back and forth with the print vendors. Press checks, I was in the air all the time. Now, I like to travel, so occasional trips here and there is fine, but I can't do it all the time. And exactly to the point. The situation that we're in right now, I'm not even able to go. So this even made it more so that it was a good thing that we had this process in place, because I kind of said, well, I can't go on press regardless. So I'm glad that I trust in my vendors to be able to execute what my expectations are. So once we, put this process in place, and like Ron said, I think we're 4.5, 5 years into it. We're always evolving it. We've learned a lot from it. I tweak it all the time, but I'm really thankful now that this process is in place because the vendors and I can communicate. I can communicate with my procurement team. We have measurements in place. It's no longer subjective. I actually have data. So now we do, internal proofs in-house. I have my own proofer. I'm lucky to have my own Spectrodens. We've gotten the colors under control. We're, working with the actual Pantone books. We have occasional special colors. So if that's the case, we are sure that we send the lab values to the vendors so they have something to work with. We're pretty limited for on-site press approvals now, unless there's a special technique that we're doing, or we're trying out a different color, or we're actually not sure how something might show up. But for the most part, we have eliminated any press runs from just normal everyday packaging. And then, like I mentioned, we have software in place. There is a pass-fail system. The vendors all use the same software I do, so I can get live data coming into me. So I know to expect, if I need to expect that something might have gone wrong on press, I'm aware of that. My vendors actually reach out to me now. I actually have an email from one this week that said, hey, we saw this went wrong on press. We caught it. We think we got most of the bad product out, but just to let you know. So what a great thing to have your printer reach out to you and say, hey, while we were scanning these, we noticed this went out, and now we're trying to catch it. I would rather be surprised before the packaging gets to the plant than when the packaging gets to the plant. You can go ahead and move to the next slide. So as I think, communication is key. So to quickly go through this, we have global print standards in place. We tell them what the spot color requirements are. You can see here on the slide, we're requiring under 2 delta E. We're clearly communicating with the vendors what our expectations are. And then down to the next slide. And as I mentioned, we have we have a reporting system in place, and we do scoring and evaluation, and I can look this data up, and I can talk to my QA team about something. I can now call the vendor and say, hey, I'm looking at XYZ report. It looks like something went wrong, and we can communicate instead of me standing in my office going, well, I don't think this is the right color, but I'm not positive it's the right color. Now I know because we have these measurements in place. Next slide. So part of it is communication and part of it is education. And that means educating your print vendors. It means educating the internal design team and our external pre-press teams. So we go through now and we offer up ICC profiles, and you can go down to the next slide. We place color bars on all our packaging. I think Ron had also showed that to you so that we have this control in place. Next slide. And then as you can see here, we actually now have a proofer in-house. And I would say between the proofer and having our own handheld Spectrodens, those were 2 key things for me. Because now I can print a proof myself. My brand manager can see it. If they say, I don't like the way the chocolate looks, or I don't actually particularly like this blue color, and I think Brian mentioned it, and I've gone through it too, they'd say, but you can fix that on press. Well, no, I can't. I'm going to fix it in-house before it even goes to the vendor. So we can tweak it, we can reproof it, and we won't send the art out until we have a good valid proof. I then keep that proof in-house with me, and then I also send one to the print vendor. So a lot of our vendors don't even send proofs back to me. I just say, here's my proof. I already know you can match to it. Please match to what I've given you. And if they don't think they can match that on press, then we can have a discussion on that. Next slide. And then the last piece is the ink drawdowns. And again, we have a pretty tight, value. You can see a little bit written here is that we really want those drawdowns sent in to us. We want them on the substrates that we're printing on because, as you know, we print gravure, we print litho, we print flexo. Sometimes I'm on craft paper, sometimes I'm on a high gloss paper. And it's also being able to educate the brand or, somebody else on the marketing team of what to expect when these colors are printed on other materials. So this is also a key point for us. I have a big, huge book in-house. The QA team has access to it so that we know what the expectations are there as well. Next slide. Again, color bars on our packaging. You can see here that we let all our pre-press vendors, all our designers know, how to lay these color bars out. They're extremely important. There's been a few times where we haven't had good ones on, and that really messes you up. So as you can see, key benefits here. Brand designers and brand teams can align on what they want prior to the print run. The jobs can move to multiple vendors with the same results. That's a key point for a global brand. They can be printing anywhere in the world, and I'm going to get the same results. Reduced need for on-site press checks and travel. Clear expectations are set up front. Definitely an increase in consistency, efficiency, and savings. Like I said, I would go on press and I would have 10 pulls and I'm stressing about what things look like. No more. I now have a proof. All my vendors can scan. We know exactly what's going to happen. And honestly, if we go 2 to 3 pulls on a press check, and if things aren't pulling together, then we'll actually pull the job and kind of reevaluate what the art looks like. So there's that. So higher consistency on reprints. Brian touched on that as well. That's a big, huge deal. I only see the first maybe 1 or 2 print runs, and then after that, a package could be running for the next 2 or 3 years, but I'm getting those reports through that software. I'm still seeing those reports every time they rerun these jobs. It also keeps the vendor much more consistent on their plan on what they're doing. With that, I think I can end it here. Sorry, I tried to kind of rush through it so that we could get to some questions, but I'll let you take it back, Ron.
Great. Okay, and Amy, you can read questions, and if you want to flip the sharing back to me, I'll just pop up a brand queue screen.
All right, sounds good. Passing it back to you.
Yep.
Okay, so I think I saw at least 3 questions come in. These are a 2-parter, and it came in during Brian's section. So drawdown question: where is the industry heading when you send a digital target to the printer, a .cxf file, and ask that they match within less than 1 DE? Do you still ask for a physical DD to numerically and digitally approve, or do you rely on the printer to hit the target you sent them?
Boy, that's right up Sonia's alley.
Well, if you want me to field that question, yes. I mean, that we do ask for that drawdown to be under 1. They have to send the drawdowns in to me, and I have to approve the drawdowns and send them back. Once we're on press, we're not asking for it to be 1, but I do ask that the drawdown be as close to 1 as possible. Again, depending upon the substrate, I'm a little more lenient on certain substrates. But yeah, we hold them to it, because at least at that point, I know that the ink vendor is actually capable of hitting that color once it's on press. Because once it's on press, it's really hard to try to change that ink. So I'm pretty strict about that.
Yeah. And Brian?
Yeah, I would. My first thought would be, if you're trying to hold under a delta E of 1, you're probably asking for some problems at mass manufacturing levels. That's pretty difficult to do. I'm sure the printers are out there are happy to hear me say that, but you can try. It's difficult. You can do drawdowns. Now, for us, we actually do it slightly different as well. Is not the drawdowns are one thing, but we actually also require our suppliers to match that color after coating. So if we have different types of coatings going on different, slightly different types of paper, we actually require our suppliers to match that color after coating, so that on shelf it looks the same regardless of what material it was printed on.
I agree with that.
Yeah, and then just as a note, the drawdown typically in an ink lab, like if it's an ink lab drawdown, they can get that to maybe 0.5 or something really great. But on press, that completely changes. So yeah,
I'm not that tight on press. It's the drawdown that I require it to be like 1 or under, because I know once on press, things start to slide out a little bit. So I want them to be starting with the best point as possible. Definitely not that tight on press.
And there was a follow-up. Based on what Ron said, are you saying that you provide one file with one profile to all printers, not adjusting for individual press profiles? We use multiple printers and modify files for each of them.
For us, we send one file. That file may be printed. We send one file with one color aim or one ICC profile embedded towards it. So that's communicating what the output intent is. Then from there, if for example cost savings comes in and we decide to change the paper or something like that, we have the printer retarget the new output aim, and then they run it through their profile for that specific press. Then as they measure it, that actually ensures the consistency. So it definitely still follows the G7 methodology for how that's done.
Same. We also we have one. We embed our ICC profiles as well. So we don't change our files per vendor. They have to go with what we are giving them. That would be too much chaos.
Sonia, this next one's for you. What software do you use to monitor vendor performance?
PressLine.
All right, this next one is long. This probably has to be our last one, so bear with me as I read it. The common Grackle target makes perfect sense for overall color matching across multiple print methods with a single file. If you have time, can you elaborate on how print vendors and pre-media shops are dealing with print specs that vary from vendor to vendor, e.g. minimum dots, like 1% for litho, 3 for flexo, 5 for gravure, UCR, GCR. Even with the same print method, one flexo vendor will have 1% HD, another 3% conventional, etc.
Let me just answer real quickly, and then you guys can jump in. But typically, for these different print processes, we would have the same target, but we would have different tolerances. So we would, allow an exception for a flexo minimum dot. We design knowing that's going to happen, and have same target, different tolerances for them. The other thing would be all of these. Typically, we'd use SCCA substrate corrected colorimetric aims, which you can learn about it from Idealliance, but it's telling us what will happen on a different colored substrate to Grackle. So if we started with Grackle and we did this substrate correction, we can see and predict and proof to what's going to happen using that same file. So I'll let you guys jump in. That's my little quickie technical.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say, Ron, is we use the SCCA, the substrate correction. Without that, we would be in a mess of having to release so many different files.
Yeah.
And sending those, we would inevitably send the wrong thing to the wrong printer, and it would just create a monster headache.
Yeah. Agree.
Yeah. Also, I see one question that came in real quick I want to jump to because I breezed over it. Yeah. Asking about metallic colors or other special processes. So I found that this doesn't necessarily work that great for metallic colors. Or if you have a pearlescent coating or some of those sorts of things, you can get some initial data, but it's not as easy as a straightforward print job.
Yeah. Yeah, metallics are tough because normal spectrophotometry doesn't work. With what they normally have in the press room, it doesn't work. So metallics are probably the big challenge in this.
Yeah, Lindt does do a lot of metallics, unfortunately. And we also print sometimes on metallized substrate. On the metallized substrate, it's a little bit easier because I can put white behind the color bar. So I still use a color bar and I'll put white underneath it if we're using normal ink. Lucky for me, actually, some of the vendors actually purchased the higher end spectrophotometers that can actually read the metallized ink because they're trying to hold it for us. I don't actually have one, but that one is, it's tough for metallics.
Yeah. Great.
All right, we are at time for today. I want to thank all of our presenters so much for that, and I'll remind everyone that the recording will be shared with you in a day or two of today's session, and thank you to everyone for attending and for your questions. Sorry we weren't able to get to all of them, but thanks a lot, everybody.
Yep, thanks, guys.
Yep. Thanks, everyone.